Hello everyone, welcome to this webinar. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21 and Infill Voices, and this is one of the many webinars that we do. And today we're going to look at a rather interesting issue around donuts. You may wonder what that is, but it's to do with climate change. And a lady, a very inspirational lady called Kate Raworth, has written a book about donut economics. And you'll find out what that is as we go along. And it will make sense when you hear about it, because you may wonder when you hear the word donut associated with economics, but it does make it fun and it makes it lively. And it's illustration, and Kate in her book says she loves illustrations. And yeah, we've got Kath MGuire with us today, and she's from a group in Cambridge who are trying to apply Kate's work, which is a model, if you like, to see how we can develop our services and our economic activities within a framework of sustainability. And we're going to talk to her about that today. So Kath, thank you for joining us today. And, you know, maybe we can start by you very, very briefly telling us something about yourself.
Okay, well, thank you, Francis, and hello, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and to be able to talk to you a bit about donut economics and how we're making it work here in Cambridge. So, yeah, my name's Kath, and I've worn a number of hats in my time. So I have worked as a teacher, I've done some volunteering in international development, I've worked in administration, I've lived in Cambridge for quite some time, though the eagle-eared amongst you will notice that this probably isn't my native accent. So I'm an Australian originally, but I've been living in Cambridge for quite some time. And I came across the Cambridge Donut Economics group several months ago and thought that sounds exactly like the sort of thing I want to be involved in. And I signed up, and the rest is history.
And history is in process, and you're developing this idea. I mentioned Kate Raworth started this in her book called Donut Economics. Some people will know what that is, but could you briefly describe for those who don't what is meant by donut economics?
Absolutely. So the book Doughnut Economics, which is about how to think like a 21st century economist, is written by Kate, and she's a British economist who's done some work in international development. And it's about rethinking the way that we think about economics. So let's start with the donut. So at the moment, with the planet that we've only got one, and things that we're doing right now might be affecting the planetary boundaries. And we all know this. Climate change is a problem, ocean acidification, lack of biodiversity, all of these sorts of things are problems. So what we can't do is just live any way we like on the planet. There are planetary boundaries. So we start by drawing a big circle, and that shows us our planetary boundaries, and we want to not exceed those. Now, staying within our planetary boundaries is perfectly fine and very, very easy if we don't want to eat or live or anything interesting like that. So that's not enough. So what we need to do is draw another circle inside, and that gives us our social foundation. And that's making sure that people on the planet have enough food and education and healthcare and peace and security and all the other things they need. And that means that inside, you've got the hole in the middle, you've got the outer circle of our planetary boundaries, and the donut itself is the safe and just space for humanity to live. Okay, and Kate talks about this in her book, and she's got some ways of achieving that, but that's the donut.
Okay, let's go back to Kate Raworth. Mariano Mazzucato's written a book called The Value of Everything, which is an interesting book where she says, you know, through the history of industrialization, we've been looking at wealth as something we extract. It's not something we create. It's not something of intrinsic value. And is that what Kate Raworth is saying as well, that we extract wealth and that makes us live in an unsustainable way?
That certainly does align quite a lot with what Kate says. So in traditional classical economics, it's very much based on that sort of principle of you take what you need in order to be able to make what you want that you can sell to people in order to make money. And doing all of that means that we have GDP, and that's a wonderful thing. We can then measure how successful we are. But as Kate points out, and you're absolutely right, she is definitely not the only person to have noticed that this might not be the best system. Lots of other writers have written about the problems associated with this as a model. So yeah, she's looking for a new way of being able to approach things, and she's definitely not interested in something that's extractive by design. She wants something that's regenerative and distributive by design. And when she's talking extractive, she is talking about things like, let's go to the DRC and dig up some cobalt that we can stick into our mobile phones. But she's also talking about the social aspects of extraction as well, about taking people's labor, and about using people and thinking of them as resources to be sucked dry. And these are things that we don't want to see happening. So the donut allows us to look at things slightly differently. And that's what I think makes it useful, but it does align really nicely with very many other writers.
Yeah, up until about 2008 and 9, when the crash came, we were living in a world of monetary economics where people believed the market would sort everything out. Mm-hmm. Now there's been a revolution in economics since then, modern monetary theory, Kate Raworth's work, people looking at value in different ways. Do you think that's a sign that the market isn't working and we have to find other models?
I think it's a sign that lots of people have gotten to the point where they can't ignore the fact that we've always known that the market doesn't work in that way. And even some of the original writers, when they were writing about some of the aspects, so the people that came up with GDP as a measure of growth originally, they originally said this was not something that could be used as a big sort of be all and end all measure. And somehow it got turned into that. Nicola Sturgeon gives a great speech talking about well-being economies, which is something that's happening in Scotland and a few other countries. And she talks about the fact that GDP measures, it measures things like going and buying a mobile phone and the work we do in the coffee shop and things like that. It also measures illegal drug use. It also measures arms sales. And what it doesn't measure is the unpaid caring that many of us do for family members or for other people in our community. So it's been known for quite some time that GDP isn't a measure of everything and can't be and never was intended to be so. But I think you're right, the fact that people are talking about this now, it really does feel like this is an idea that's coming of age, which is a really lovely position to be in.
Kate uses the donut, and she does it because she believes illustrations is important. She was very inspired by Paul Samuelson's economics book, I gather, where he had a huge number of illustrations. She said, that's how you teach economics. That's how you get people to understand economics. So is it the illustration that really makes that particular model of economics so potent for people?
I think it's certainly a part of it. So, and the donut, that first image that we talked about with the inner circle of the social foundation and the outer circle of the planetary boundaries and the safe and just space in the middle, is a really easy thing for people to kind of catch on to. And that's great. And one interesting thing about the coronavirus crisis we've been seeing recently is it has allowed people to really discuss a lot more about the notions of social justice and climate pressures and being able to talk about these things in the same sentence. So the donut's important, but the donut is not the only diagram that Kate draws when she's looking in her book. So do read the book, it's great. But there's lots of other diagrams she goes through as well. So the supply and demand curve, a very famous diagram from economics, and she boots that one out. The infinite growth of GDP, that gets the shove as well. And also looking at the circular flow economy and various ways of linear economies about extracting, as you'd said earlier on, Francis, about going from resources until end of useful economic life. And again, she redraws a lot of these when she goes into more depth about the different ways in which we can approach economics to really fit with the 21st century needs.
Well, I think what's interesting about her model is it's not just a sort of pictorial illustration, and she's not just questioning the demand and supply model that comes from the 19th century, but she's also looking at indicators, isn't she? She's trying to see how you can measure whether in all the things that you do in localities and local authorities do, for example, they do meet the sustainability measures and credibility.
Absolutely. And that's, again, that's not new. So the amazing work that was done, first of all, with the Millennium Development Goals, and then further on with the current Sustainable Development Goals, are certainly an acknowledgement from the global community and inside nations as well, that we want to be able to see what people should be entitled to. We want to be able to see where we are with regard to these measurements, these indicators. We want to be able to have targets that we can aim for. So this notion isn't a new one. What we do need to be really careful of whenever we're using indicators for anything is that we don't end up in a situation that all we care about is the indicator. However, using indicators can really help put some meat on the bones of the pictures. So in the donut, when Kate draws it, and the global donut itself, there's a picture of that gets used in the book, and there are various other donuts we might talk about in a moment from different parts of the world. And a lot of those, the sizes of the various bars from the various segments that the inside and outside of the donut are broken into, the size of those and the color of those is determined by the size of a metric and indicator. So it's certainly a component in the concept of donut economics.
I mean, you've made it sound quite simple and yet quite technical at the same time. And that means that people can begin to understand that it's not just a utopian thing. And in fact, some countries are beginning to get very warm towards the idea of donut economics, aren't they? And Costa Rica is one country, isn't it, that's actually applying it.
Absolutely. So there's a number of places around the world that are working on this. So country level, state level, regional, city level, and even smaller than cities as well. So it is happening on a different scale in various different places. So Costa Rica, Barbados is another one. Some people are using bits of it in different ways. So the European Union has recently done some work on environmental measures and the current state of the environment, and they use the donut as part of their kind of scaffolding and their framework for doing that work. Amsterdam has taken on the donut, and the principles of the donut have been applied with Amsterdam, and Kate Raworth was involved in this process as well, to downscale the donut to a city level. And that's something that's worked well in Amsterdam. Brussels have done something slightly similar, and that's at more of a regional level rather than just the city. It's a bit bigger than that. And there's different places around the UK that are working on it. Cornwall and Devon are doing some fantastic things. And of course, here in Cambridge as well, we're doing some work on it.
You mentioned that it's being done locally, and that was my next question. It isn't a national aspiration or a national scheme. It's something that local communities and local authorities can take up. And you mentioned Amsterdam, you mentioned Brussels, you mentioned Cornwall, who are working with the University of Exeter, and they have got a really good plan with really strong indicators of success. But you want to do that in Cambridge as well, don't you? So tell us about your Cambridge group. Excellent.
So yeah, so we've got a group here in Cambridge, and I'm not sure of the current membership level. It does vary. By vary, I mean increase. So we're well over 50 people at the moment, and growing all the time. And it's people from different parts of Cambridge and different parts of Cambridge life. We've got young people and older people. We've got academics. We've got programmers, engineers, teachers, doctors, artists, you name it, we've got it. And that's one of the really good things about it. It is a really diverse group of people. But what we're trying to do, and this is the same thing that most other cities are trying to do as well, is thinking, well, locally, in the area in which we live, what does it mean for us to say that the people of Cambridge are thriving? And this is a really key part of Kate's book. So for Kate, it's not just about saying, let's measure how well a country or an economy is doing by looking at GDP and seeing if that's growing. The question isn't how do we grow? The question is how do we thrive? So what does it mean to be thriving here in Cambridge? And we've got lots of people working together on what that means. How do we decide what sort of ways of looking at this? What sorts of issues do we care about? What sorts of areas are really important here in Cambridge, which will be different to other countries and other places around the world? And then how do we measure it? And what do we do with that information? How do we make change? How do we get transformation happening here in Cambridge?
Well, I suppose many people will want to ask, yes, you can look at how people thrive and how they thrive in a sustainable way. but you really need to measure it to find out whether your planet is going to survive. You've got to stop carbon emissions. So how does this link up with, for example, the Green New Deal?
So I don't know much about the Green New Deal, but what I can say is that different cities and different locations have targets already built into various bits of planning that they've got anyway. So the Cambridge City Council has a number of targets that it's working for, and it has a city plan. And this is true for lots of other areas, and areas of different sizes, whether it's cities or regions, countries, or larger groups, larger than countries like the EU, or even international organizations. So there are targets that people are aiming for anyway. So being able to link in nicely with some of the existing targets is a helpful thing. So a lot of people are working towards carbon zero. That's something that lots of organizations are familiar with, lots of nations are familiar with. And there is work being done at all different levels, from grassroots community, this is really important, from bottom up all the way up through the different levels up to national and international governance organizations, working to try and measure some of these targets and working out how we can meet them. Yeah, and this is both the environmental, the ecological targets to say, how do we try and bring ourselves within the planetary boundaries and stay there, but also the social foundation at the bottom to say, how do we actually make sure we're keeping ourselves above that foundation?
But how do you know that you are? I mean, if you go to different localities, you'll find there are many sustainable groups, many sustainable groups that are operating, recycling, litter pickup, community energy, and so on. But no one knows. Well, they know that they're making life better, they're thriving, but they don't know whether they're making any contribution to helping you stay within that boundary in the circle. How do you, in the Doughnut economics model, try to get them to measure their success, link it all together to see in totality that you're within the middle of the donut?
So the way that the city view of Doughnut economics, I suppose, goes is we look at things from 4 different lenses, and one of them is about local and social. So it's looking at what local social impact something has. And it might be that what we do, and different cities are doing this differently. And so apologies for the fact it sounds like I'm prevaricating a bit. It's just that different cities do it in different ways. They have different things that they're really interested in. So it might be, for example, that we've got a project here in Cambridge, and in order to see how does this fit in from a Doughnut economics viewpoint, then we might say, well, with this particular project that you're doing, what is it doing locally for the social indicators, measures, dimensions that we've got for the city? So how is it helping gender equality? What's it doing for education? What's it doing for access to energy? What's it doing for water, access to water, and so forth? The next one is the local environmental. So we might say, well, does this have an impact locally on the local environment here? So is it causing massive amounts of car travel, which is going to lead to massive air pollution locally, etc.? From there, we go to the global social and global ecological as well. Now, it is difficult to work out when you do one tiny little thing to say, well, what is that impact on the global ecological system? What is your footprint? Is buying this mobile phone, what effect does this have on climate change for your city, for the nation, globally? What impact does it have on ocean acidification? In Brussels, one of the things they're doing is actually trying to do doughnuts for common everyday objects, and the smartphone is one of them. So they will be looking at what the impact is and trying to draw a donut for a smartphone so that people can see that. Now, I know that you asked, Francis, about actual indicators and how do we measure this and how do we see where we're going. And this is something that can be done at various levels, but even without necessarily being able to put a measure on it and say, we recycled X tons of plastic last year and this year we've recycled X plus 7 tons of plastic, therefore we're getting better, etc. What it certainly does, and this is something that Cornwall are doing, they've got a decision-making wheel. It can be something that just allows projects to look at it and be able to think critically in these particular areas, these particular domains, to think, how does what I'm doing have an effect on education, peace and security, political voice? How does it have an effect on nitrogen and phosphorus loading of the planet, land usage, etc.? These things can be measured. If you set up indicators for them, it is possible to do that and then compare them. Some places are working in that direction to set up targets now and being able to revisit it next year or the year after in 5 years' time. This is going to depend a bit on what councils want to do with it, and perhaps organisations who may do that themselves. They may set their own targets within a Doughnut and then be able to see how they're measuring improvement year on year. Here in Cambridge, we're at the very early stages of this, so we don't have indicators that we've defined just yet, but it's a process we're starting to work on.
Well, I mean, Cornwall's been going at it for quite some time, and the University of Exeter, I know, have published a really, really comprehensive PDF with all those diagrams you talked about and all the indicators, and we can distribute that to people if they're interested. And that makes me think, I mean, when you're a group of volunteers, you don't always have the full expertise to do all these complex things. How important is it to link up with universities like Cornwall's linked up with the University of Exeter, and I gather you've linked up with Anglia Ruskin University. How valuable and in fact vital is that?
It's absolutely vital. So in the first instance, it's absolutely vital for CAMDEAG, the Cambridge Doughnut Economics Action Group, to link up with other organisations, civil society organisations here in Cambridge in the first instance. So any other organisation, because there are lots of organisations who are working along similar lines, who have similar viewpoints about some of these issues. And it definitely makes sense to be able to leverage their networks, their people, their skills and expertise. And the questions of universities is even more so, I think. So number one, they've got lots of really interesting people who've been thinking about some of these things for quite some time. So Anglia Ruskin University, as you mentioned, one of the other universities here in Cambridge, they've got a Global Sustainability Institute. So they've got some amazingly talented people doing some wonderful work in there on global sustainability, and have been for quite some time. Where it becomes really useful for organisations like ours, and organisations for yours, if any of you out there are planning on doing a similar thing, is that many universities do have access to some forms of funding, perhaps impact funding. And it might be that some of that funding can help organisations to grow. They've also got access to doctoral students, research students who might be able to provide some expertise. And they've got a network of experts, so they can put you in touch with other people who might have more expertise on the food domain, or on education, or on ocean acidification, or nitrogen and phosphorus loading. So for lots and lots and lots of different reasons, support from Anglia Ruskin University is absolutely invaluable to us, and we're incredibly grateful for it.
Okay, so you have links with civil society, you have links with academia, which is really important. I agree with you on that. What about the local authority? How are you going to get them on board?
So, and the local authority, absolutely crucial in this. And we've got strong links with the Cambridge City Council here in Cambridge. And part of this is because one of the councillors, current councillors with the Cambridge City Council, has been interested in these kinds of things for quite some time. And she's been working in planning, and she's been really interested in sustainability in planning. And she heard about Doughnut economics and has gotten involved with the group. So she's been incredibly valuable because she's been able to be a champion for these concepts within the council. Certainly, what we absolutely don't do, and we wouldn't do this for the council, we're not going to do this with any other organisation. And from hearing about how organisations, Doughnut economics organisations, are working in different cities, it's fairly similar. What we're not going to do is knock on the door of the council and say, here's our blueprint, do this, because that's just not going to work. What we are doing is forming bonds and alliances with people who are already thinking along the same lines and working in the same direction, and being able to pair up and partner with them in a way that allows us to give them perhaps a framework they might not have had before. It gives them some access to a group of people, us, who are able to do some work on their behalf as well. And having that leverage and that power within the council is wonderful for us, because it really does help to get us to the point where we're able to really influence change. So it works well for the council, and it works well for us as CAMDEAG.
I mean, that's interesting that you're working in alliance with people and councillors and so on who are keen. I mean, you can't confront the council, front on, really, can you? Because many councils have declared climate emergencies. They produce very often bog standard plans where they've got a consultant in who's done things the way they've always done it. And they're a bit resistant sometimes to taking on new ideas. They think they've done their job by having a consultancy, but they haven't got anywhere, really. How do you convince those councils? Is it this slow process of attrition? And do we have time for that slow process, given the fact we're in an emergency?
That's a really good question. And I suspect that you would get several different answers from different members of the donut economics community about what the best approach is. Generally, because of the way donut economics works best, this might be really, really different in one city compared to another city. So it's really going to depend on what's happening to you locally, who the local people are that you've got representing you on council, who the local members of the civil society are who are working on behalf of concepts like donut economics. In some cases, it might need more of an in-your-face approach. In other cases, it might just be that there's enough people who are already aligned that just being able to sort of help persuade them is all that's needed. In Copenhagen, in the city council there, one of the councillors there has done some absolutely amazing cross-party work. So she's from the Alternative Party, but what she did was deliberately sort out people who were not in her party to be able to see where they aligned, so that together they could put something to the council as a whole, so that the concept of donut economics would be approved by the council. So it is largely about meeting people where they are. It's about listening to other people and finding out what their lived experience is, because it's not about Kate Raworth and her book has all of the answers for everything. It's more about, here are some tools and approaches and ways of thinking about things so that we can come up with our answers. Is it too late? I certainly hope not.
Well, I think we all hope not.
Yeah.
And in fact, you're doing a lot of work. You have other groups around the country as well. I mean, if people are interested, how do they find these other groups, or how do they start a group of their own?
Excellent. So if you do an internet search from your favorite search engine, Ecosia is good, they plant trees, other search engines are available. If you do a search for donut economics, you will probably in your travels find DEAL, which is the Doughnut Economics Action Lab. And that has been started by Kate Raworth and some others. And that is a place where you can find all sorts of resources and information about donut economics itself. Some really nice chapter summaries in there. If you don't want to read the book, read the book, it's great. There's also links to different organizations in different cities and different countries around the world. There's regular events, webinars, etc. When you become a member of the community, which is really easy, you just need to say you want to be a member of the community. It's possible to post your own events and things like that there. So that's a great way to tap into different resources. The Doughnut Economics Action Lab, DEAL, worked in consort with several other organizations to create a methodology for downscaling the donut to city level. And that was what was used with Amsterdam, Philadelphia, and Portland. So those were the 3 pilot cities, and all the information, including the full methodology, is available on the DEAL website. So do have a look at the DEAL website. There you'll find information about us as well, CamDiag, and you'll be able to start your own groups if you want to, or you'll be able to find other people who can really help you out with that.
Okay, so you've given a lot of information about resources, but if a group wanted to start, I mean, in Enfield, where I live, we have a climate action forum with over 100 voluntary groups. If we wanted to go down the road of donut economics, or if another locality wanted to do the same, what's the one piece of advice you would give them to get started?
I think what you want to do is to make, get a central focal point for people to be able to access your information. And it might be that Facebook is the right way to do that, and that allows you to sort of interact with other similar organizations, or it might be a website, or both, social media of various descriptions. And I think start that, get people talking, get people reading the book, get people interested in the concepts. And once you've got a few of you together who are able to talk about this, then you can start seeing what the best way for your group to grow organically is. And again, have a look at DEAL, because on the DEAL website, there's lots of tips and ideas and contacts of people you can get in touch with to work out exactly what next steps might be best for you.
Okay, so finally, because we've come to the end of the 30 minutes pretty well, if people wanted to find out from you you know, what you're doing in Cambridge and get the advice from you. Are you happy to give them that advice, and where would they go to get it?
Absolutely. So if you go to the Cambridge Doughnut website, which is cambridgedoughnut.org.uk, and Doughnut is Doughnut. Alternative spellings are also available. But if you go to cambridgedoughnut.org.uk, you'll get some information about what we're doing in Cambridge, and there's ways of being able to contact us, join our mailing list if you want to get some more information from us. We do have links and connections and so forth with other organisations and people who are not just in Cambridge. So please do get in touch. And the wonderful, wonderful Cambridge volunteers who do things like read our email and check it will be able to pass that information, the questions on to the right people. So there we go, cambridgedoughnut.org.uk.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. I mean, that's really, really, you know, important information to have. I mean, thank you for doing this. I mean, we live in dangerous times because of climate change, but we also live in exciting times because so many new ideas are coming up. To me, it's like the 1920s and 30s when John Maynard Keynes was around, and there were these huge new ideas coming, and the establishment and politicians were all orthodox of all parties. And we're like that now. New ideas are beginning to emerge, and all the old parties are, you know, going to the bog standard approach of doing things. So it's a really exciting time, and I'm really pleased you told us about this and what's happening, because I think it will inspire others to look at this and other initiatives that are taking place as well in civil society with universities. And we hope we can impose that on, I mean, with their consent, with local authorities and government institutions as well, because that is absolutely vital. So, you know, thank you very much for doing this, Kath. It's been a very, very useful webinar and very important information. So thank you for joining us, and we'll stop this interview now.